Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Knock Knock Podcast. My name's Simon Jones, and today we've got a really special live episode for you. So recently, Jason was asked to speak at an event called Creative Mornings. Now, Creative Mornings is a worldwide organization with over 180 chapters throughout the globe, and basically, it's a breakfast lecture series that is held for the creative communities in different parts of the country. This past month, November, the theme was death. So Alicia Binkley, who heads up the Nashville chapter here, she reached out to Jason and asked to share his story, to share more about the journey of the Knock Knock podcast. It was so exciting to see some of our listeners there in attendance, and there was also a Q&A afterwards. Now, we're going to share all this with you. Unfortunately, the questions in the Q&A section, they weren't mic'd, so we're going to do our best to recreate the questions that were asked, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. Quick side note, although I was not able to attend this event, I had a pretty good reason, so you'll hear more about that later. I hope you enjoy this talk and the conversation, and I'll be back a little bit later in the podcast for some closing thoughts.
It is time for Jason B. Jones. Jason is the creative director at a record label, and then in his spare time, he decided he would also like to work. So he has created a podcast in which he investigates. I mean, he's going to tell you all about it. I'm actually so jazzed. I want to just launch into your story, man. But I want to note, bless you again, how special it is that people with such talent will give up their time when really he should be at work to come here and tell you about the things that they create. But for now, I can really just use some help welcoming Jason to the stage. Thank you, Jason, for being here.
Hey, everyone. My name is Jason B. Jones, and I couldn't be more happy to be here today. Thank you to Creative Mornings for having me. Thanks for, I have so many friends and family in this room. The creative community those are my people, and so getting to talk to you about what I've been working on for the past year is really special to me. And I think we were talking earlier is that, there's something really, there's counseling that comes from just sharing your idea openly with people. And this has been something that's been so personal to me that it's going to feel good, I think, I hope, to be able to share it with you today. So death is a really tough topic. A year ago, I would have never thought that this would have been something I would be discussing. I thought if I were going to be talking at Creative Mornings, it was going to be about the record business or designing for artists or whatever. But this is a quote that has really helped me wrap my head around this journey that I'm on. And it says that death is not extinguishing the light, it's only putting out the lamp because the dawn has come, which I just think is, it's just so beautiful. I think a lot of times we think of death as it being so negative, but there's so much good that can come from it. But as I get into it, let me just tell you a little bit about me. I'm 37 years old. I'm married to my wife, Rebecca, of 12 years. She's awesome. I love baseball, and I'm from Houston. So a couple of weeks ago, I had a really, really good night that my wife captured and shared on Instagram. If you want to know what unbridled joy sounds like, that was it. And so I just wanted to share that with you. I don't know if many of you have experienced a world championship, but this was quite a night, and we celebrated it in style. Today I try to look like an artist. That night I did not. I just tried to put on as much Astro stuff as I could. So just go through a few professional highlights. In 2005, I started a company called Otterball. We built websites for mostly musicians. I had a chance to work at a development company called Tie Mill and played a part in launching some e-commerce websites like Warby Parker and Bonobos, Rent the Runway. In 2013, I started at Capital CMG as their creative marketing director. Got to work with a lot of cool artists, and now I am the creative director at Integrity Music. And so pretty much anything that happens in the record industry that's not audio, I have my hands in, which is just an amazing job. And I'm blessed to go there every day. It's so good. As a designer, and maybe some of you guys can relate, I stay under headphones a lot. And, when you work in the music industry, sometimes you don't want to listen to music. I love music passionately, but I got into podcasts. How many people here listen to podcasts? Yeah, that's all y'all do. And so I, like many of you, I really got sucked in with Serial, like everyone did. And Serial is the story of a guy by the name of Adnan Syed, who is convicted of a murder that many people think he didn't commit. And so once I sort of went down the Serial rabbit hole, that led to Undisclosed, which is, furthering that story, and then Truth and Justice, which furthered that story. And what was really fascinating to me about the podcast format was this medium, this episodic medium, where you could listen to an episode one day, and then a whole bunch of stuff could happen in between that episode and the next. And so you really felt like you were in real time part of this story. But this podcast changed everything for me. So this is a podcast by the name of Up and Vanished. It's about the unsolved murder of a teacher in the Georgia area. And it was started by this young filmmaker. He had no investigative experience. He just, like me, kind of got into Serial and thought, hey, this could be cool to do. It was his first ever podcast. But what he did that I related to is that he knew how to tell a story. Have any of you guys listened to Up and Vanish? Okay, so spoiler alert. His podcast really helped to solve this murder. And that blew my mind. And so, I had this thought, can I do that too? So I want to tell you a story. This lady, this is Catherine Krigler, and I never got a chance to meet her, but she's from Starkville, Mississippi. She raised a family, was there her whole life, enjoyed spending time with her grandchildren. As you can see, that's her with her granddaughter, Juki. She had come into poor health later in her life and actually had one of her legs amputated. So she was immobilized and confined to a wheelchair. Catherine's house, you can't see this. Well, maybe you can. So her house was really right across the field from her church, First Presbyterian, where she went over there as often as she could. And she was, Starkville's a really small town, and so there was a lot of community around this church. And this is my step-grandmother, Betty Jones. You can see me, I'm in both these pictures. And she was 65 years old. She was a widow. My grandfather passed away in 1981. And so she spent her time traveling and loving on her children and her grandchildren. And she was really beloved by the whole town. And one of the things that I think is so special about her is she was a huge Mississippi State baseball fan, which, as you can see, I'm a baseball fan as well. And I feel like I came by that honestly. So on September 3rd, 1990, at Catherine's house, Betty came to watch Catherine to spend the evening with her because she was on some medicine, she was having a rough night, and so she was going to go and spend time with her, and they were going to, just be girls, watch TV, hang out. Sometime between 8 and 10 p.m., someone knocked on the side door, and this is a small town. I can't even imagine the door was locked. And Betty answered the door. This person forced his way in and slit her throat, and she died there in the living room. After that, covered in blood, he went and picked Catherine up out of her wheelchair, threw her on Catherine's bed, and brutally assaulted and raped her and left her for dead. Fortunately, Catherine lived and was able to give description to the Starkville Police Department, and that's where this sketch came from. Unfortunately, she died from her injuries on November 11th, just a couple of short months later. So this has been something, this happened when I was 10 years old. And for my whole life, we never really talked about it, because I don't know if any of you has experienced this in your family or your life, but when it's unresolved, that's just not a topic that comes up at Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's something that you bury deep down. But Up and Vanished and Serial and this idea of this community of people who cared about justice, it really sparked something in me. And so that's where, out of a conversation with me and a buddy of mine, that's where Knock Knock came from, where we thought, is the time now to unpack Betty and Catherine's story to hopefully an audience that'll care. So in February 2011, I just bought some gear. I'm a designer, so audio has always been around me, but I didn't know what I was doing, so I bought like a Zoom recorder and a microphone, and I just started interviewing people. You can see this. This is one of the first photos that we took in February. This is my mom, and I was so unsure of myself. I would get on phone calls, and my mom would sit next to me and take notes and then remind me of what questions to ask. That's how foreign this was to me. And, it was just an exercise of trial and error. And as I got into a lot of these interviews, I realized that I had to go back to Starkville to really understand what was happening. And I had not been back in 27 years. When I was there for Mama Betty's funeral, that was at 10 years old, that was the last time I had gone to Starkville. So me and my buddy Jason Adams, who is a very gifted film director, decided to take a week and go and see what we can do. This is a photo of me in the Mississippi State Archives, finding information about my grandmother's case. I met with local law enforcement. This is a gentleman by the name of Sergeant Bill Lott, who is doing amazing work. He is the one that is really championing this case to try to move it forward. Interviewing. This is Catherine's son, and man, the stories that he told me about his mom. I never knew this woman, so it was so special to hear him talk about his mother. We just dug in. We just got really deep into what was this. And I was learning more information than I had ever heard before. And it was a really special time. And out of that trip, we made a video trailer. And so I'd like to show that to you.
Hey, I wanted to interject here real quick. So at this point, we showed the original video trailer that we launched on Memorial Day, which was directed by our friend Jason Adams. If you want to watch that video, go to knockknockpodcast.com and click on the video on the homepage. Okay, back to Jason.
Yeah, so we made that trailer and we launched it on Memorial Day, May 29th. And so the idea was that we were going to launch a trailer, we were going to launch the GoFundMe, and we were also going to launch the website all on the same day. And we launched it, and what I say in the trailer that I wasn't going to emerge without scars, and those scars happened very, very quickly. I'm a storyteller, so in order to be able to tell a story, you have to captivate people who are callous to this in the world. And I didn't take into account how impactful this was going to be, both positively and negatively. And so we had family members who were frankly upset and hurt, and said very mean and hurtful things. And so I had to get the team together. I had this director friend of mine, my producer, and I said, listen, we've got people that are really upset. And my producer said, shut the GoFundMe down. Just shut it down. We had the GoFundMe up for 2 days, which, I thought that we were going to have, the idea was we were going to launch the podcast on September 3rd, and this happened in May. And so we had all this time that we were going to point everyone towards, the things that we were doing. We were really going to start to raise funds for production, and that didn't happen. So we were left with this, we've got this trailer out there that is getting all of these views. What are we going to do between now and then? And we came up with this idea of pre-production diaries. I think one of the things, if you're an avid podcast listener, is you don't really know what happens behind the scenes. And so our audio was terrible. I was recording things poorly. It was a train wreck, but I thought that there was something really beautiful about showing that. This was our happy accident. And what ended up happening is we ended up getting a lot of people that dug in, that really came along for the journey early on, and that all led up to episode 1. So what I'd like to do, episode 1, it launched on September 3rd, which was the 27th anniversary of Betty's death. And I'd love to play for you the first 3 minutes of episode 1, just so you can get a flavor of the story and what we're telling.
So at this point, we shared with the audience the first 3 minutes of episode 1 that launched on September 3rd, 1990, the 27th anniversary of Mama Betty's death. So to listen to that episode or any of our previous episodes, you can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our website at knockknockpodcast.com. Just click on episodes at the top of the page.
So that was the first 3 minutes of episode 1. And so honestly, doing this is so hard. But it's probably one of the most rewarding experiences. I have a day job at a record label, and this is what I do on my nights and weekends. So whereas a lot of times people go home and rest, I'm digging into really hard emotional topics, where I feel completely unqualified to tell this story. And this is, because we don't have any funding, it's all coming out of pocket. The logistics of setting up interviews, it's so hard to do this and so emotional. But the thing that I always come back to is that if after 27 years, if it's not me, who's going to do this? And this is what I believe. I believe that if this guy killed my grandmother, then it's likely that he killed someone else. And there are other grandchildren in other living rooms who are having this same conversation, who have lived their whole life wondering what happened. And I believe, as painful as it can be to talk about death, is that there's healing in talking, in having this conversation. And so what's been happening is we've had 100,000 downloads so far, which is just unbelievable to me. I know it's so small in the world of podcasting, but it's so huge in this story that has just been so personal for so long. We were featured in Apple's New and Noteworthy, which was awesome. We've been covered in media all over Mississippi. This is just a few examples of the coverage. And I'm having current conversations with like DNA experts and government officials, and people are reaching out and people are getting involved. And it's not just in Mississippi and it's not just in Nashville, but it's all over the world. But what's really interesting is if you've listened to, I've watched Stranger Things season 2, I think a lot of you have, and Netflix has this idea of they release everything at once and then you binge watch it or binge listen to it in the case of podcast. But this is happening in real time. We're working on an episode right now that is changing as we get to release date because I'm getting more information. And so what's happening next is we've got Episode 4 coming out, which is Who is Catherine Krigler? We have Q&As in between each episode where our listeners are calling in and sending in messages and letting us know what we can fix and what we can change and any questions. And then Episode 5 is going to really start to dig in deep to the investigation and then a Q&A afterwards. And where it goes from there, I don't know. I'm on this journey and figuring it out as I go. But I believe that as long as we're diligent to it, things are going to work out. And we have really simple goals when it comes to this podcast. Selfishly, I wanted to get to know a grandmother that I lost when I was 10. I want to honor these women's lives, and I want to seek answers and justice. And as we've talked about it, I want to spread this story to anyone who will listen. We want to build community around this because if it's just me, nothing's going to happen. But if we can build a community, then we can really advocate for change. But the thing that's so huge is by the way, if you ever want to start a podcast about a murder, don't do it alone because it gets really dark and really scary and really serious. And so I have an amazing team that have come around me to help me. These people, I couldn't, and I'll get emotional about this, but I couldn't do it without them. These people in the middle, I've never met in person. This is Chris Cerrone and Lacey Arcioli. They're podcast producers that have millions of podcast downloads to their credit, and they're doing this for free, y'all. Like all of these people dig in for free because they believe in what we're doing and they believe in this story. But I need to mention someone specifically because this is my little brother Simon, and he is my co-host for these Q&A episodes, and he serves as communications director. And I never knew how special it would be to do something because Betty was his grandmother too. He was really young, but it was his grandmother too, and he's involved. And he's helping, and he's digging in, and we're doing it together. I wanted to bring him up to talk a little bit about his experience, and he can't be here today, and so he sent a video that I'll play real quick for you guys.
Hey, Creative Mornings. My name is Simon, and I am Jason's little brother. I am the Director of Communications for the Knock Knock podcast, and as you can see, I'm here in Rome. My girlfriend and I had a vacation already scheduled before the Creative Mornings thing came up, so I'm really sorry that I can't be there. I want to give you a little bit of a background on the Knock Knock podcast. So obviously Mama Betty's death has been part of Jason and I's lives since we can remember. More so Jason, as he was older when it happened, so he has more memory of it. And really our whole lives, it never really sat well with Jason. It bothered him, it really itched at him. And through recent years, as he really got into other podcasts like Serial or Up and Vanished, I think he was inspired. I think he saw that something can be done. A conversation can be reborn about these cold cases, about these murders that occurred that are unsolved. So the real goal behind the Knock Knock podcast, obviously to find justice for our Mama Betty, but I think the bigger picture was creating a community around this tragic event and encouraging those conversations to happen and connecting other people who are interested with the story to have the conversation, to really ask the questions that haven't been asked for years and spur that on to hopefully an end goal of finding answers. I want to say thank you to everyone who has listened to the Knock Knock podcast. It really personally means so much to Jason and I and our family. So thank you again. And if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to please have a listen. We have a few episodes already out, and we'd love to have you listen and share your thoughts and feedback. We have our Facebook page, we have Twitter, we have Instagram, and our website, knockknockpodcast.com, all set up so that you can engage and interact with us. So thanks again, and ciao from Rome.
As you can see, he's roughing it in Rome. So everyone always asks, when I tell this story, it's so heavy, but they always ask how they can help. So I'm going to give you a really quick way to help right now. Everyone has your phone on you. Man, if you could subscribe and just give it a listen, that's the biggest way that you can help us. Because I really believe that we're all degrees of separation from each other. And the more that people hear this story, the further this story gets out there, the closer that we come to finding answers and justice. And then rating and reviewing. I know that sounds indulgent, but as you know, iTunes weighs things based on ratings and reviews. And so if you like it, which I hope you do, if you would rate and review, that'd be huge. And then it's about joining the community. Simon touched on a few of the ways that you can do it. But even if you're listening, calling in, we have a number set up, 1-888-57-BETTY. You can call and leave a message, and we'll feature that on our Q&A episode. Because it's not about me. This is one of the things I want to drive home, is if someone walked up to me today that had more experience, that was qualified, that had a depth in investigative journalism and said, listen, I want to take this from you and run with it, I would gladly give this up. But I feel so burdened that if I don't tell this story, that no one will. So please, number 4, just share it with as many people as you can. That's so huge. And I want to leave you with a final quote. Oh, sorry, before we get to the quote. I have people that are supporting me, and 2 of those people are Thistle Farms and Fashionable. They are amazing organizations. I'm sure you're familiar with them. They are so awesome, and you should definitely check them out. But I want to leave you with a quote. That our dead are never dead to us until we have forgotten them. And Mama Betty, I will never forget you. Thank you for listening.
Well, you guys, we have plenty of time for a few questions. So as y'all digest that, feel free to put your hands in the air and toss out whatever might be on your mind.
Here's where we jump into questions from the audience. Now, just a reminder, the people asking the questions weren't mic'd, so instead, I'm going to read their questions as close as we could get them. Here we go. I have a question about how you went about finding the people you interviewed for the podcast. Where did you start, and what did that lead to? Were there a lot of people interested? I'm sure there were a lot of strangers along the way. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so I started like a dummy, just with the people I know. Like, that's like just the low-hanging fruit, as they call it. I would, my mom was so helpful in that because she, knew the players. She knew the people that were around to talk to. And so I just reached out to them. But one of the things that I did at the end of it is I would say, hey, if you were doing this, who would be the next person you would reach out to? And that just opened the floodgates. They would be like, oh, well, you need to speak to this person. And I'd be like, oh, that'd be great. Could you connect me with them? Oh, I'd be happy to. And that just led the rabbit trail to more interviews. I think that's really what's really hard. What I've learned about this is there's also a lot of like red herrings. Like in a small town, there's a lot of conspiracy and craziness. And so like I've had so many people talk to me about a suspect that has already been ruled out from a DNA perspective, but it's always coming, oh, you should look at this person, you should look at this person. So being really tight with the police department and being able to work with them has been just a blessing to really getting to the important information rather than just the hearsay.
That police officer you're pictured with, by his age, was he a police officer in Starkville in 1990? Was he there at the crime scene?
Yeah, great question. He was not. He was a campus police officer for Mississippi State University, and he didn't become a Starkville police officer until later. But he has been he's drawn to this case because he had an aunt that was a teacher that really helped to raise him, and so he had an affinity towards really researching this case and has taken classes and really, and that's not even his job. This is something he does at nights and weekends as well. But he was around the Starkville area when this happened.
So what about DNA and forensic evidence?
Yeah. What is fortunate and unfortunate at the same time is that Catherine lived and survived the attack, and there was a lot of DNA that was recovered from her. In 1990, we weren't doing the level of DNA that we are today, but they were able to capture all that. So they've run DNA even like they did it in 2015 to find out more information. So they're continuing to really research that as the technology increases, and we'll talk about that in depth in one of the future episodes.
In transitioning from the role of consumer to creator of this type of media, is there anything about the narrative structure of the podcast that surprised you and impacted the story?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, she asked, in going from a consumer to a creator, is there anything that surprised me about that sort of narrative, of the narrative approach of a podcast? Yes. I realized that when a journalist sits across from someone that they are interviewing, they have the ability to then leave and go and hang out with their family and forget about it. When I was having those interviews, it was way more emotional. It was really hard to turn off and be objective. And I think that's why you'll see a lot of these podcasts are third-party people that engage in stories that they aren't directly connected with. And so that's why really early on I put a team around me, because I would be getting like backlash and all of these things. And I worked in the music industry. It was I had this dummy moment because I work with these artists all the time that put their heart and their soul into these albums. And then you have like 50,000 people that say it's amazing, and they have two people they hate it. And the artist focuses only on those two people. And I would always be like, what are you doing? Like, everyone loves it. And then it happened to me, and I realized how debilitating and emotional that can be with something so personal. So I just built a team around me to try to to help guard my creativity around that so that I could really focus on the goal.
I've listened to a lot of podcasts where they've run into the files being closed. Have you experienced that at all?
Completely, yeah. Sergeant Lott is amazing, but it's really close to the vest because I wish we lived in a world where everything was open and everybody had access to everything, but our legal system requires that some of that stuff be protected. And this isn't, I was talking to someone that said, well, can you go and see the crime footage, and can you go and read Catherine's description? And if this had gone to trial and then was public knowledge, yes, I could, but I can't now because a lot of that's closed. So I'm really focused less on those things, the things I can't control, and focused a lot more on stories and really digging into the people around it. Great question.
I think just one more question, unfortunately. It's always when I say that there are no more questions.
Then they're done, yeah.
Is it difficult being a character in your own podcast? Like setting aside the real you while also having the podcast you?
Yeah. I'm getting better at it. It's extremely difficult. I've had people online that have said that it feels disingenuous, and it just wrecks me because it's so awkwardly genuine. But it's really difficult to try to bounce between those two because there's sometimes, as you saw, that I'll just break down. Like there's been many times that I just want to quit. I just want to quit because it's so emotional. And then there's the creative in me that wants to see this through. So it is a constant battle back and forth of to really trying to figure out how to separate myself from how personal and emotional and raw this can be.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Wow. What a great talk. What a great topic. Who knew that there was someone in Nashville doing work like that, and getting 100,000 downloads? I can't even imagine the geographic coverage of those people who are downloading your stuff. It's so cool to see someone in person talk about something that means so much to them. And that is really what Creative Mornings is all about. We are here to be together, and we're here to have conversations about things that matter.
Thanks again to Alicia and Creative Mornings for inviting Jason to speak. On behalf of the entire team, we are honored to play a part in the amazing work you are doing for the creative community in Nashville and around the world. We continue to be so amazed and humbled by all of the interest in Betty and Catherine's story, and we're so grateful for all your participation and support. If you'd like to find a Creative Mornings chapter near you, visit creativemornings.com. To join the Knock Knock community, be sure and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Knock Knock Pod. There you can ask questions, leave comments, or just say hi. We've also set up a voicemail at 1-888-57-BETTY. If you have comments or questions, or you'd like to be a part of the show, please call and leave a message. You can also rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you download podcasts. Reviews are key to keeping Knock Knock on the charts, where people can find our show. Knock Knock is produced by Jason B. Jones and Chris Cerrone. Special thanks to the Knock Knock team, Lacey Urcioli, Rebecca Jones, Jason Adams, Cole Flynn, Colleen Jones, and Maggie Thomas. We'll be back soon with our next full episode, so please share the podcast with your friends and family. Thanks again for subscribing to the Knock Knock podcast.